Ukraine incursion into Kursk gives them a strong place at the table because they've got a part of Russia. And that'll be part of the negotiations. Giving them lots and lots of weapons will be part of it too, but only in terms of security guarantees. It doesn't really help them negotiate. It just says, look, we're going to give them lots of weapons. They'll be as secure as they can be against another Russian invasion, to deter another Russian invasion. And maybe so, and maybe not. We saw what happened last time when the powers offered that. But we really have to figure out, what does a strong position at the negotiating table look like?
Yes. Now, shall we talk about Ukraine? I haven't talked about Ukraine so far, and there's a lot to say about Ukraine today. The Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, has now become the latest ally of Ukraine to say that the focus of support for Ukraine needs to be on preparing for peace talks, not helping to defeat Russia. And those comments came after Keir Starmer used his first major foreign policy speech to talk about Kyiv needing to be put in the strongest position possible before going into negotiations with Russia. Well, what does Jim Townsend think of that? He's a former Deputy Secretary of Defense for Europe in Washington and also NATO under the Obama and Biden administrations. Hello to you, Jim. Welcome back to the program.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Jim, this really was, and welcome, it really was a significant contribution from Mark Rutte, wasn't it? It means all the momentum among Ukraine's allies has now shifted pretty much behind seeking those peace talks.
Well, it's fascinating. There has been talk over the past 2 or 3 weeks since the election of Donald Trump that there was suddenly a focus on negotiations and not so much on sending in the equipment to help them, fight and recover the lands taken by the Russians. This statement by the NATO Secretary General really kind of formalizes that, in fact, that's where everyone seems to be going. Is let's talk about negotiations. Trump says that's what he wants to do on the first day. And now you're going to see both the Russians and the Ukrainians trying to posture themselves so that so that they'll be in a better place when those talks start. Yes. And we'll have to see what Russia's going to ask for. It's not just going to be Ukraine related, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, in the case of Mark Rutte and Keir Starmer, they've been talking about both, haven't they? Which is, moving ahead towards those peace negotiations, but getting Ukraine into the best possible shape before they begin, which means giving them the supplies, the munitions they need to be in a strong position at the negotiating table, which begs the question, Jim, would a new Trump administration be on side with that, strengthening Ukraine to strengthen their arm in negotiations?
Well, I've heard that that Trump will be alongside strengthening Ukraine if that's what he has to do in terms of leverage over Russia. His warning to Putin would be, if you don't go along with doing some type of sincere negotiations, I'm going to pump Ukraine full of U.S. weaponry. I mean, I've heard that's what could be a tactic that he would use. But this is something where I think we have to ask ourselves, too, what does it mean to be in a strong place at the table? The Ukraine incursion into Kursk gives them a strong place at the table because they've got a part of Russia. And that'll be part of the negotiations. Giving them lots and lots of weapons will be part of it, too, but only in terms of security guarantees. It doesn't really help them negotiate.
Yes.
It just says, look, we're going to give them lots of weapons. They'll be as secure as they can be against another Russian invasion, to deter another Russian invasion. And maybe so, and maybe not. We saw what happened last time when the powers offered that. But we really have to figure out, what does a strong position at the negotiating table look like?
Yes. Well, that question of Ukraine and security guarantees could soon become absolutely crucial. We know because Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader, has set it out for us very clearly that if he's to go into negotiations with Vladimir Putin, and maybe that involves freezing the line of battle, he wants Ukraine's territory to be protected by a NATO guarantee. You know NATO, Jim. Would NATO agree to guarantee Ukraine's security after a cessation of hostilities?
Well, that's the question of the hour, and they are talking about that right now in Brussels, I'm certain. I think Zelensky, the opening move of Zelensky today at the ministerial was trying to put on the table right now NATO providing membership to Ukraine. My understanding is that the answer was no, certainly from Hungary. I'm not sure where Biden is going to be on this, but in the past, he has said no in
Yeah.
terms of NATO membership for Ukraine. And so I think while as important as this is going to be, right now, the answer is no. And this is something in the negotiations that's going to be on the table, because this is something that Putin is going to say, I cannot live with NATO on my borders and NATO in Ukraine. That's not going to work for me. And so for Putin, for Zelensky and the rest of the West, we're going to say, well, for us, this is a must do. This has got to happen. And so it's going to be very contentious.
Yeah, but it's pretty clear, Jim, isn't it, that the idea of membership of NATO for Ukraine is a very distant prospect. However, what Zelensky seems to be looking for is some sort of guarantee so NATO would help to support his position on his side of the border. And from what you're saying, you would not get a unanimous agreement across NATO for that to happen. So it couldn't happen within NATO. In a word, if it's not NATO, who? Can you see Europe doing that? The American side aren't going to be involved in that.
Well, that's interesting. Remember the Budapest memorandum that was signed when Ukraine agreed to give up its nuclear weapons. That was a coalition of the willing, if you will, including Russia. They signed this memorandum saying that they're going to provide security guarantees, and it didn't work. So if NATO is not involved in terms of providing those security guarantees, if NATO's not part of it, it'll have to be another coalition of the willing, the U.S., France, UK. But if I were Ukraine, I'd say, well, that didn't work last time, but why is it going to work this time? But, just one thing to add, it could be in the middle of negotiations, if for some reason Putin agrees to a NATO security guarantee, NATO membership, then we'll see if maybe at NATO they could agree. Maybe the Hungarians will be on board if Putin says it's okay. Maybe Trump would be okay with that once he becomes president. So it could be that while it's a no today, once we get into the negotiations, if somehow it can be worked out, then I think NATO would be on board that. But they got to go through the negotiations first, and Putin would have to agree.
Okay, step by step, that's a lot of maybes. Jim Townsend, thank you so much for your contribution, as ever, this afternoon.
Ajudesse.